After lunch, Bill put on the Lion King slippers and flew to the bus stop. But then he wondered if, realistically, this was his life. Then he wondered if this was his life.
When I first saw this movie, I was around 14 years old. I was pretty sick at the time and bored just laying around in bed. I had a list of animated movies to watch, and It's Such a Beautiful Day was a title that really stuck out to me. I hadn't heard of Don Herdzfeldt before, but the stick figures and the sweeping classical music had me mesmerized from the beginning. It's kind of hard to describe what kind of experience seeing it was. I'd have to say one of a kind for sure. I think it's the best film I never want to see again. It is a sad film in a way, and sometimes it's disorienting and a little scary, but it's also funny, intriguing, and beautiful. It's actually a collection of 3 short films: Everything Will Be Okay, made in 2006, I Am So Proud of You, made in 2008, and It's Such a Beautiful Day, made in 2011. It opens like this.
On the way to the bus stop, Bill saw somebody he recognized walking towards him, but he couldn't remember his name. He began to think of things to say when they'd be close enough to acknowledge each other. As they drew nearer, their eyes locked, uncertain if the other was going to stop to talk. The person greeted Bill, as Bill mixed up the phrases, "What's up?" with "How's it going?" Confused, the person blurted out, "Thanks," before he knew what he was saying. Words caught in Bill's throat, and he replied, "Way." They did a sorta awkward half-turn, and then continued on, now confident that the other was not going to stop to talk. They never saw each other again, and a day later had each forgotten the whole thing. Later that night, Bill sat down and put on a big sweater, but it only made him sleepy. In the supermarket, Bill was always very careful to select fruit from only the back of the produce piles, as the fruit in the front was at crotch level to the other customers.
It's one of the best openings I've ever seen. It's like the entrance to a Samuel Beckett novel, giving intriguing details to seemingly mundane events in Bill, the main character's, life. And the classical score really adds an elegance to these little things, yeah? These little things are important. This film is full of deceptively small events. Initially, they may not seem that important, but these little moments are what make up Bill's life. And, even better, these little moments have already been made interesting, as you're introduced to the unique workings of Bill's mind. You want to find out what happens next because he's already an interesting and engaging character, even though nothing special has really occurred. So, the beginning of the film seems rather uneventful. Our protagonist seems to have a fairly normal, boring life, but something about it already feels slightly off. You know something's wrong, or is about to go wrong, but it's hard to put your finger on what it is. Maybe it's the sound effects that sometimes seem a bit too loud, drowning out the narration.
Bill dropped his keys on the counter and stood there staring at them, suddenly thinking about all the times he'd thrown his keys there before, and how many days of his life were wasted, repeating the same tasks and rituals in his apartment over and over again. But then he wondered if, realistically, this was his life, and the unusual part was his time spent doing other things.
Maybe it's some of the weirdly specific and detailed descriptions of what Bill is doing or seeing.
Bill took a walk in the park to try and get some fresh air. He noticed somebody had written, "I love you," in the playground sand, and he thought that was really beautiful. As he continued on, a sudden dribble of urine shot down his pant leg. That was unexpected. Then some little fat kid with a deformed foot tried to sell him a magazine subscription. Bill looked at the list of magazines for sale and angrily wondered why they didn't offer any Asian porn. Then he wondered why he wondered that.
Or maybe it's a scene like this, where Bill sees a boxer get his head split open and later sees the boxer as himself. Slowly, you start to see the world more and more through his lens of perception, starting with small moments like this.
He began to think of people in a new light, how everyone's just little more than that frightened, fragile brainstem, surrounded by meat and physics too terrified to recognize the sum of their parts, insulated in the shells of their skulls in lower middle-class houses, afraid of change, afraid of decisions, afraid of pain, stuck in traffic, listening to terrible music.
Eventually, it's revealed that Bill is getting treated for some kind of neurological illness. Whether it's dementia, schizophrenia, or some other disease is never disclosed, but Bill suffers from memory loss and hallucinations. One interesting thing about this film is that instead of being shown a view from the outside looking in, where you know exactly what's real and what isn't, you're placed directly in Bill's point of view. You see everything the way he does. This leads to some really disorienting and weird moments. For example, when Bill has a follow-up with his doctor and learns that his treatment isn't going well.
His doctor said he had some discouraging news. The latest tests ruled out the possibility of further surgeries, and his current treatment didn't seem to be making any progress. He wanted to start Bill on something new. He couldn't think of any reason why Bill should be seeing things, though, and asked him a series of questions. You have to understand that the doctor's going through a lot of stress right now. We'll see if we can't figure something out.
The brilliance of this approach is that it forces the viewer to be stuck in Bill's world for a while. In a lot of films that have themes of mental illness, you're only in the perspective of the mentally ill person for a certain amount of time, so you never have to fully immerse yourself in what they see. In It's Such a Beautiful Day, their perspective is almost all you see. You have to decide for yourself what is real and what isn't. That means the film is very open for interpretation. Every viewing is personalized. For example, in one scene, after Bill has a mental breakdown, his mother comes to take care of him, and this happens.
One morning, as Bill was staring at the patterns in the carpet, she noticed a loose thread in his collar. "How could you think I'd ever want to hurt you?" she said, and crumpled to the floor. In that moment, Bill thought she looked really old.
You could interpret this scene as being uniquely heartbreaking, as Bill's paranoia has caused him to see threats everywhere, even in his loving mother who has come from miles away just to take care of him. But as the film goes on, and the full extent of his family's history of mental illness is revealed, this scene might come across a little differently. The ending of the first chapter is bittersweetly triumphant. Bill gets very sick, and his family members come to see him one last time. His mother brings in flowers and starts planning his funeral, but Bill rallies and survives, seemingly to everyone's inconvenience.
His uncle, whom Bill had not even noticed in the room, had taken a lot of time off work to fly in all the way from Tulsa. He looked vaguely annoyed. After another 2 days, they concluded Bill was not going to die, so his mother had all the flowers removed from his room. She also had to have his casket returned at great expense and inconvenience.
Still, the chapter closes with this quiet, peaceful, almost happy scene.
It rained for the entire bus ride.
In the next chapter, we learn more about Bill's life and take a walk through some of his memories.
Last week, Bill's class took a field trip to the beach. His half-brother, Randall, came along, a little boy in the special class with aluminum hook arms, whose mind was as misshapen as his legs. No one at school really knew him because he always rode a separate bus, and was taught to stand within the confines of a tetherball circle every recess. In the late afternoon, Randall was over with the adults when he spotted a gull overhead. His eyes burst with emotion, and he suddenly took off stumbling after it. Tears streaming down his little face, he stretched his aluminum hooks as wide as he could towards the sun, howling, "Boone, Boone," and disappeared into the deep blue sea. The other kids were surprised he could even run that fast.
This scene is a great example of the film's dark humor, as the kids are more shocked by Randall's speed than the fact that he actually ran into the ocean and drowned. And what I really like is that it's not even that unrealistic. Children do often think like this. Anyway, this is the first glimpse of increasingly horrifying memories from Bill's childhood, as we learn that Bill's mother was, and could still be, mentally ill, something that probably led to his stepfather leaving the family.
His parents argued again that night, and she threw meat. His stepfather stormed to the door, where he turned his face up towards a hole in the ceiling and yelled, "I just can't handle this goddamned woman," and left. she stared at the front door and rocked there in place, saying, "Ah, ah, 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 ah."
But despite having crippling fears and paranoia that sometimes make it difficult for her to leave the house, and that lead to her overprotecting Bill, Bill's mother still takes the time to do this.
Every now and then at school, he'd find a note from her in his lunchbox.
As time goes on, Bill's memories keep getting stranger and stranger.
When Grandma would visit and he'd show her his drawings, she'd often imagine how easily she could toss little Bill into the fireplace. Or even through a thin window, for he was still young and quite small and floppy, and she reckoned light enough for a woman of her size and strength to hurl across the room several yards or more. In the middle of the night, she opens the drawer to find the preserved cat head from last week. She can feel the fish smothering her brain, and the magic scrubbing of their furry little heads across her skin is doing less and less good. Doing less and less good. She decides this is because the little heads are of low quality, and she needs more of them. More of them from horrible pedigree scientists. Little heads with better hairdos, and cleaner little ears, and clearer eyes. Grandma was born in Bootblack, Wyoming, 2 years after the great mudstorms drowned all the hogs. Her father serviced electric machines, and once strangled a rock in a fit of religious excitement. He enjoyed wood, and telling the children late-night stories of how his own papa used to tame the wilderness. He was a quiet, unassuming man who was eating an onion one day when he was cut in half by a train. Grandma's older brother became a preacher who grew his mole hairs long to purify his soul. In his early years, he secretly fathered an illegitimate child and smothered it one night in the abandoned stable. As he aged, he became plagued with firebugs, and once claimed to have seen an aquatic creature make off with a sheriff's prize cow. He was eventually crippled with lead poisoning and polio, and was killed by a train. Grandma's little sister Polly had beautiful golden hair and pounded at imaginary animals with a hammer. She died at the age of 8 after contracting yellow fever and catching on fire. A wild man wandered into town that summer and beat the church organist with a shovel. He defecated what looked like a pile of blueberries on the family porch and disappeared, howling into the marsh. Nobody knew that this wild man was in fact Grandma's great-uncle, a forgotten, unwanted child who'd been fed carbolic acid and abandoned in the northern woods 52 years prior. He ate mud and sticks, and knew only how to say the word Bible. He died alone in a field one summer morning while dreaming of the moon. 6 weeks later, a sunflower grew out of his head. In their later years, Grandma's family moved to the big city, where her mother lived out the rest of her days making jam and persecuting Jews. There was a bush in front of their building in the shape of a heart that made her cry every time she saw it. She died alone while Grandma was away at boarding school, surrounded by visions of phantoms. Grandpa died 11 years before Grandma did. He used to sit next to her every Sunday, but now she plays his bingo card for him.
I know that was a long scene, but it's honestly one of those things better shown than explained. I also find it one of the best sequences in the film. The matter-of-fact narration of Bill's insane family history is both darkly funny and a little chilling at the same time, especially since it's set over a sweeping classical symphony. It makes the stories of their lives seem both important and also bizarre, ridiculous, and ultimately meaningless. Later in the second chapter, Bill receives a message that his mother has died, and when he looks through her old things, he finds, among other items, her medical records.
Beneath the album was a folder of his mother's medical records. Attached to her initial diagnosis was a physician's note that strongly recommended she never have a child.
And he also finds this.
Near the bottom of the storage box, Bill found an old notebook he'd never seen before. Filling the pages inside, his mother had repeatedly practiced her handwriting, so she could send him off to school with the best-looking notes.
I like the shot after Bill's discovered this notebook. It looks almost as if he feels sad and a bit betrayed, as if for all these years he thought the notes she left him were spontaneous and genuine, and he doesn't know how to feel now that he's seen them all laid out as if they were on a conveyor belt. Or, alternatively, he could be touched by the sheer amount of care and effort and time went to each note she gave him, which showed how much she truly loved him. After the passing of his mother, Bill begins to make observations about life and death. One of my favorites is this one.
He'd read once how each cell in the body replaces itself and dies as the years pass. How everyone is slowly reconstructed out of continuously changing pieces. It depressed him how foreign the picture seemed to him now, how his ridiculous ingrown cells had long ago stolen this happy dead kid's identity, and with his own life made a complete mess of it.
So, Bill's starting to feel better, and for a minute he dares to think that maybe everything will be okay.
On his way to lunch, Bill smiles and thinks for the first time that maybe everything will be okay.
After Bill's relapse, he ends up in a hospital ward.
His roommate's name is Matthew, a paralyzed young man hidden by curtains who communicates to the nursing staff through a row of buttons that can play 5 different electronic sentences. But more often than not, he only presses one of them.
I am in pain.
Every afternoon, the reflections of sunlight from the traffic below cast colorful patterns across their ceiling. In the mornings, the sunlight illuminates Matthew's curtain and makes it look beautiful, even though it's just gray.
Also, his ex-girlfriend comes to visit him.
His ex-girlfriend's been visiting lately, and they talk for hours about current events. Sometimes they eat ice cream bars. It's the happiest he's been in a long time.
Again, the ending of the chapter is bittersweet. Bill is still sick, and he shares the ward with a paralyzed young man who is always in pain. But Bill is still happier than he's been in a while, which makes the ending kind of optimistic, for lack of a better word. Chapter 3 opens with Bill getting a new doctor who does tests on his brain and memory.
Bill is asked to describe a series of photographs. He's able to put words to many of these objects, but is very confused by some of the others. He also has difficulty distinguishing the faces of people he knows. All of these people really just look the same. And though he can recognize his ex-girlfriend because of her long hair, he can't remember her name. He tells the doctor he has a fish living inside of his head. Possibly a trout. It'll be another night before it dawns on him that something seems missing. All the memories the doctor asked him to recall today are suddenly out of his grasp. So many years of faces and moments are mostly just a vague feeling now. The years are slipping out of his head.
His girlfriend visits him again, this time with her boyfriend Steve. This is another scene I really like, because Steve's reaction is similar to what the audience might be thinking as they've watched this, or what a person who's had to confront the severity of someone's mental illness might feel. It's one of the few times in the film that there's an outside person looking in on Bill's situation.
Today they will chat awkwardly. Bill's been unable to stay on one subject for more than a few moments, and seems to get easily frustrated. She will say she didn't know why she'd brought Steve along yesterday, and admits he'd been so shaken by the experience that he quietly cried in the car on the way home.
Bill gets more tests done, and doctors ask him whether he wants to go home under family care for a few days. He does, but his family don't seem to be offering very much care at all, as we see Bill struggle to take care of himself, repeating the same tasks over and over, forgetting that he's already done them. He doesn't even remember that he's been sick in the first place. When he does see his doctor, he's told he doesn't have long to live. And then the world completely opens. Real images of the world blend with the cartoon-like, simplistic stick figure world we've been seeing up till now.
Details in these beautiful brick walls and weeds that he must have passed every day but never noticed. The air smells different. He's never brighter noticed. Somehow, and the currents under the bridge look strange and vivid, and the sun is warming his face, and the world is clumsy and beautiful and new. And it's as though he's been sleepwalking for God knows how long, and something has violently shaken him awake. His bath mats are gorgeous. The grain patterns in his cheap wood cabinets vibrate something deep within him. He's fascinated by the way his paper towels drink water. He's never really appreciated these things. All this detail, he's never noticed. Detail. He's alive. He's never noticed. He's alive. He's alive. He's alive. He's never noticed. He's alive. The stars rattle him to the core. How these lights have traveled for tens of millions of years to reach how somewhere far away our own sun looks just like many of the stars no longer even exist, but whose ancient light is just reaching him now. An impression from a ghost, an amazing infinite time machine every night above his head that he's ignored for most of his life. He wants to stop people in the street and say, "Isn't this amazing? Isn't everything amazing?"
Bill visits his father, a man he never really knew.
Neither of these two people remember why they're there, or who exactly this other person is. But they sit and they watch a game show together. And when it's time for Bill to leave, he stands and says something beautiful to him. And neither of them understand what he means exactly, but the old man begins to cry anyway, and they will never see each other again.
Bill lays under a tree and seems to die a peaceful death, thinking, it's such a beautiful day. It's the perfect ending, right?
Wait a minute. He's not gonna die. He's not gonna die. But he doesn't die. No. Bill, get up. Get up, Bill. Bill, get up. He can't die. He's not gonna die. He can't ever die. Bill?
In one of the greatest twist endings I've seen, the narrator, who, up until this point, has been very detached and matter-of-fact, completely freaks out, seemingly unable to accept the fact that Bill has died. Ignoring what's really happened, he invents a new ending for Bill, the grandest of endings, where Bill reads every book and learns every language and meets the love of his life through various timelines and universes. He transcends time and space, and will exist until the universe itself ends. If I had to call a film my favorite of all time, It's Such a Beautiful Day would probably be it. It manages to convey so many feelings, thoughts, and emotions just with simple stick figures and the most basic of events. There's so much more to it that can never be explained in one video, and if this interested you at all, I definitely suggest you go see it for yourself. There are so many great details, like Bill taking after his grandmother with the fear of having a fish eating his brain, or Bill's mother, despite being warned not to have children, trying so hard to make up for any shortcomings with love. I know I called it the greatest film I never want to see again, but now that I've finally seen it for the first time in years, I think I finally understand it. To me, its ultimate message is that death isn't something to be feared. In the end, it'll happen to everyone, and spending your life in fear of something inevitable is kind of wasting it. Throughout the film, you'll notice there are glimpses of color in the real world that cut through the 2D animated world, and they seem to get stronger whenever Bill is said to be doing worse. I think this is because each time Bill's doctors tell him he's not doing well, he loses a little more of his fear of death, and is able to see life more clearly. And at the end, when doctors tell him with certainty that he is going to die, he loses all of his fear, and he's seeing life just as it is, finally, and he finds it beautiful, just to be alive. In facing death, I think Bill makes the greatest discovery of his life, that death doesn't matter. What does matter is getting what you want out of life while you have it, which for Bill included seeing his father one last time. It's this realization that gives him ultimate freedom in the last moments of his life. But for the narrator, and probably most people, death still does matter. Any ending would be better than one where Bill dies. The narrator's ending for Bill kind of reminds me of things like the Kingdom of Heaven in Christianity, or the lengthy spiritual rituals for the dead in ancient Egypt. For some people, anything, no matter how ridiculous it might seem if you actually think about it, is better than just dying, even if the actual moment of death wasn't particularly sad or awful for the person departing. I think this scene explains it best.
He'd been terrified of dying his entire life, and as much as he tried not to think about it, death was always in the back of his head, around every corner and hovering on each horizon. He'd brushed shoulders with death on a few occasions, but in his carefree youth it had almost seemed like an abstract, impossible thing to ever happen to him. But with each passing decade, he began to gauge the time he probably had left, and by his 40s, what he considered his halfway point at best, he had come to know just one thing. You will only get older. The next thing you know, you're looking back instead of forward. And now, at the climax of all those years of worry, sleepless nights, and denials, Bill finally finds himself staring his death in the face, surrounded by people he no longer recognizes and feels no closer attachment to than the thousands of relatives who'd come before. And as the sun continues to set, he finally comes to realize the dumb irony in how he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. This stupid, awkward moment of death that had invaded and distracted so many days with stress and wasted time. If only he could travel back and impart some wisdom to his younger self. If only he could at least tell the young people in this room. He lifts an arm to speak, but inexplicably says, "It smells like dust and moonlight."
So yeah, I recommend this film to the moon and back, along with all of Don Herdzfeldt's work. Even his student films have this uncanny ability to really make you think, and a lot of them are free to watch on YouTube. So watch them, treat yourself, watch a kid get killed by a balloon, you'll love it.